would like to welcome you all businesses joining this morning. And I will introduce our facilitators for this morning. Mr. Jan Willem van Broekhoven is the Executive Director of Holland House Colombia. And we have also Ms. Alison Paez, that is a consultant of Holland House Colombia. And without further ado, I pass the floor for the facilitators, Jan from Holland House.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Maria Dijkhoff, also for for joining this morning. Very happy to be with you. Like I said, we are going to continue in English. I think that's best for all. My options are a bit limited. It's English, Spanish, Dutch, but unfortunately, that's my option. So we're going to continue in English. Very happy to have such a great audience today. When we started to talk about this webinar, it actually was, I think, Sharon, last week. And we decided to do the webinar today because it's part of a series of webinars. And this was actually the only option left. So very happy that we could organize in such a short notice. And also good to see that there's so much interest from all kinds of sectors on Aruba for joining this webinar. So thank you for joining. Like you might have noticed, we have today there's all kinds of options of Zoom. We actually use all of them, but I still like the most dynamic version, which means that of course we can control everything today with Zoom, but I really like the version where people can turn off their cameras and can turn on their microphone. That makes it a bit more personal, a bit more dynamic. So like you might have noticed, you can all turn on your camera, you can all turn on your microphone. We are going to start with a presentation together with Alison, one of our team members. We're going to give a presentation about the Colombian market, about the sectors that we think are of interest to you. But after that, we really like to have a moment of Q&A, discussion. Some of the participants that are listening today, if you already have experience of doing business in Colombia, please share. So let's make the last part of this session as dynamic as possible. But while the presentation is on the screen, try all to mute your microphone so that there's no noises during the presentation. Well, like mentioned, my name is Jan Willem van Broekhoven. I'm director of the Holland House. I've been in Colombia for a bit more than 7 years now. That's been when I came to Colombia, I didn't think I was going to be here 7 years, but it's already been 7 years, and I think that's because it's a great country with a lot of potential. Also, of course, with many challenges, also in these times, of course. But I think a country with a lot of potential, businessmen, country of very friendly people. And I think a very creative country with a lot of sectors that only now are facing and only now are also starting to offer more opportunities in Colombia. So we're going to, in the next, I would say in the next 45 minutes, we're going to take a deep dive into Colombia. Please mute your microphones. We're going to take a look into the Colombian economy, because I think before talking about sectors and talking about where do we think the opportunities are for Aruba-based companies, I think we should first start with talking about the Colombian economy. I should tell you a bit more about Colombia, about how the economy is structured, what is going on currently in Colombia. And then after that, we will talk about the sector. So we will talk about professional services, tech services, what we call here the orange economy, but also many other sectors, which we think could be of interest for Aruba. Please go to the next one. First, very shortly about Holland House Colombia. We started the year I came to Colombia in 2013. This was actually the first of our kind in the world. The Netherlands in the year 2012 decided that it needed to have much more dynamic bilateral chambers of commerce. So chambers of commerce that promote trade between the kingdom and countries all over the world. But that concept called Holland House, actually the first one in the world, was located in Colombia. So we were the first one, we were the pilot, we were the, you could say, the guinea pig, and today we are the example of how the Netherlands and the kingdom are trying to have much more dynamic bilateral chambers of commerce all over the world. So it's a very unique concept, not only aimed at helping, because sometimes our type of organizations, bilateral chamber of commerce, what they do is help the business community that's already there. So you do a cocktail, you do a drink, you help the big companies, the Philipses and the Shells of this world, you help them be more successful in a country. But actually, what we said from the beginning, we want to do much more. We want to be the soft landing for many new companies, even for the smallest SMEs that want to become active in Colombia. We want to be their support in Colombia. We want to be their support office, and we want to do that in an effective way. So a very big focus of what we do is helping new companies or new entrepreneurs that want to become active in Colombia to do so and to become successful. We also work with a lot of local companies. So we also work with a lot of Colombian companies that want to go abroad, so that have an interest in expanding their activities in the Caribbean or in the European markets. So, and I think the other thing that makes us very special is that maybe if you have a Holland House in Vietnam or in Indonesia, they will not have that much focus on helping companies from Aruba. We do, because we are neighboring countries. Aruba, Colombia, many of you have been here in the past. So there's a very close relationship when you talk about culture, when you talk about language, when you talk about, of course, business. So I think what makes the Holland House in Colombia very special is also that relationship with Aruba and with Curaçao, being neighboring countries, being very important trade partners. So that's what I mentioned here, strong relationship with Aruba. We have currently 275 members, of which I think more than 10 come from Aruba. And actually, we're not only the pilot, but afterwards we also became the first bilateral chamber that the kingdom has in the world that actually received its accreditation. I remember very well that Minister Maduro Ruiz was part of the accreditation ceremony, which was in 2018 in Bogota. We continue to the next one, please. Well, this is a bit about what like I already mentioned, after this we are going to talk about Colombia and the markets, but to give a little bit of context, we are very active in promoting trade between Aruba and Colombia. Like I mentioned, most of all, working with many entrepreneurs, working with small companies that want to become active here. We have had many trade missions from Colombia to Aruba, but also the other way around. And I think here are some of the figures which are which show the current dynamics. So we have had about 60 companies from Aruba that showed interest in becoming active in Colombia. Afterwards, I will explain what interest means, because interest can mean several things. Some of them aim to sell something in Colombia, some of them aim to buy something in Colombia, and some of them look for alliances. And I think also, if I look at the Aruba companies that we have helped here in the past year, it's also in many ways, it's also alliances, and sometimes alliances that I didn't think of, but we have had alliances of wedding planners from both countries that said, let's work together. Colombia is a great destination for weddings, and Aruba is too. But we maybe have another target group for weddings than Colombia. Colombia could have another target group for weddings, international weddings. And so we have seen very nice alliances of people and companies from both countries working together and coming to very interesting alliances. And I think also the last point on this slide is very interesting, because also Aruba is much more important for Colombia than you might think. Besides the fact that, of course, there's many people originally from Colombia that live on the island, but also in trade. If you look at Colombia, a country with 50 million inhabitants, almost, if you would sum up the exports of Colombia to the world in the last 6 to 7 years, so you get the total figures, you will find the United States on number 1. So United States is the most important market for Colombia, but you will find Aruba on place number 7. So of all the markets in the world, Aruba is for Colombian companies the 7th market in the world for their products. And the Netherlands, to give you an idea, the Netherlands is number 5. So the United States number 1, Netherlands number 5, and Aruba is number 7. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that Aruba is also much more important for Colombia and for Colombian trade than we might think. Let's continue to the next one. Oh, here we see some more figures. Colombia is in the top 5 of export destinations for Aruba. So if you look where does Aruba sell its products and services outside of Aruba, you will find that Colombia is already an important market. And if you look at where does Aruba buy its products, then you will also find that Colombia, for the Aruba imports, is also quite important. Here will we find some products that Aruba buys from Colombia: petroleum, touring cars, jewelry, medicines, some of the products. And we also see the investments. The investments are there, but I would say relatively low. So it's not the biggest investments, but there's of course also investment between the countries. Let's continue. Oh, then we make the step. So I talked a bit about the Holland House with one objective in reality, which is show you that there's a very close relationship between Aruba and Colombia, and also show you that as Holland House, we are very committed to help new companies from Aruba to become active here. Well, then about the Colombian economy, I think some of the factors that I would like to mention you are already here. We will get into detail, but Colombia, a big country, Colombia, 50 million inhabitants, Colombia, 27 times the size of the Netherlands. And Colombia, I think, a country which is the first bullet, every time more diverse. 20 years ago, the Colombian economy was very dependent on what is mining and what is the oil and gas industry. Today, it's much more independent of those industries. Colombia, very strategically located, access to both oceans. Colombia, a country with rivers, Colombia, a country with deserts, Colombia, a country with all kinds of climates. So very strategically located. And also, if you look, of course, from an Aruban perspective, also very well and strategically located for Aruba. Dynamic and stable economy. Colombian economy has been growing over the past 20 years, has been stably growing, and before COVID-19 kept growing, but of course that has changed the course. But stable economy, the days in which Colombia had very big fluctuations are in the past. And Colombia also, if you look at Latin America as a block, then you see that in the past 10 years, there's countries that have been less open for international trade or for working together with companies from other countries. And there are countries that have done the opposite. I would say Colombia and maybe Peru, of course, Chile, Panama would be the best examples of countries in Latin America that have been very open. So they didn't close borders, didn't have a lot of protectionism, while in Brazil or in Argentina or of course Venezuela, you will find much more protectionism and not that much openness for working together with companies from other countries. Colombia has been the opposite. Colombia in the past 20 years has signed trade agreements with almost the whole world. And that's something I think also very important. So these are four main aspects of the Colombian economy I would like to discuss with you. Let's continue. Oh, here we see that if we put the Colombian economy in perspective, Colombia at this moment is the economy number 32 in the world, and is the fourth economy in Latin America. So the biggest one would be Brazil, followed by Mexico, Argentina, and the fourth one would be Colombia. The second aspect that I also mentioned is the openness for business, and also I would say the business climate. If you look at the business climate of Colombia, and there's a lot of indexes, but I think the best one to look at is always the World Bank index of countries, and then specifically look at the doing business index. In the one from 2020, we will find Colombia on place number 67 in the world, which makes Colombia a typical emerging market, but also one of the front runners in Latin America if you look at openness. So if you look at getting credit, protecting investors, solving insolvency, then you will find that Colombia is doing very well. So Colombia in many aspects, if you look at how easy is it to establish a company, if I invest in Colombia, how well is my investment protected, you will find that Colombia in many aspects is the best country in Latin America, at least in the indexes. This is 2019, so this is before the pandemic. Here we see what happened in Latin America in 2019. The biggest economies, we see that Colombia and Peru, the top countries looking at economic growth. We see that Brazil, Argentina, of course Venezuela on the right, didn't get close to the numbers of Colombia. Of course, this is 2019. In the first quarter of 2020, Colombia was still growing. So until the end of March, Colombia was growing 1.1%. But of course, since then, also things have changed here. We have had very strict lockdowns from mid-March to, I would say, the end of June. It has been very strict. Economy has been halted quite a bit. So we are now in the economic reactivation, which seems to work well, seems to create positivism in the economy. But of course, Colombia also changed course quite abruptly from April onwards. The next one, please. This is this is a bit more looking at the current figures. There's a lot of studies going on to see, and it's always scenarios. So I think there's no fixed scenario. Scenarios change. The pandemic is taking more time than originally thought by many. But here we see a bit what happens. So on the right side in orange, we see the forecasts at the beginning of this year. And at the left side in red, we see the forecast that were made in June. So we see the difference where Colombia was supposed to grow between 3.5 and 4% this year. We are now talking about a decrease of around 5% of the economy. So that's to give you the context. What would I like to show in this one is that Colombia was supposed to be one of the quickest growing economies in the region, like it has been for many years. But now it's one of the less decreasing economies compared to, for example, Peru or Brazil, where the fallback is much bigger. This is, of course, a scenario. So we don't know what's going to happen in the last months of the year, but it gives you an idea of the current status in Latin America and how COVID-19 has also changed course quite heavily in Latin America. The next one, please. Here we see the real GDP growth. We see more or less the same tendency. So we see that in 2020, all the countries are going to decrease, but in 2021, growth is again expected. And we see that maybe and that's of course also logical. If your decrease is lower, then your growth next year will, if you talk about percentage, will of course also maybe be a bit lower. So that's the case of Colombia. So Colombia hopes to grow 3% again next year. I think that's ambitious, but this is what the World Bank thinks. But at least it gives you an idea of red 2020, blue 2021. So it also gives us, of course, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. What is happening currently in Europe shows us that the pandemic is not over. But at least in Latin America, growth is again expected for 2021. Continue, please. Well, then talking about population, we saw that Colombia, talking about economy, is the number 32 in the world. Talking about population, it's number 29 in the world. Colombia has almost 51 million inhabitants, big country with very big cities, most of all. Bogota, where I live, a bit more than 8 million inhabitants. But Colombia has has many cities of more than 1 million inhabitants. So also looking at population, of course, a very big market. And that's also something I always, I think it's a message that also is a good moment to mention it here. That if you look at, when I first came to Aruba 7 years ago, I gave my first presentation about the opportunities I saw for Aruba entrepreneurs in Colombia. There were all kinds of reactions. People said, no, but Colombia is very big. We are very small. Colombia has a lot of companies. We don't have that much big companies. How do we? So a lot of, I would not say skepticism, but a lot of companies that were doubtful if what they are doing in Aruba, or what they are selling, what they are developing would also work in Colombia. And I think after 7 years of pushing and giving these types of presentations, although with at this moment 73 participants, I think this is the one with most participants, which really pleases me. But after 7 years, we have seen that there is already many examples of Aruba companies that are active in Colombia and are actually successful here. So build up a business here, are selling their products here, are working together with Colombian partners. And of course, that takes time. I think a lot of things in life take patience, and doing business in Colombia also is patience, is exploring, is finding the right strategy, and then also giving it the time needed to actually implement. But if you take into account that you're talking about the economy number 32 in the world, if you talk about an economy with more than 50 million inhabitants, I think it's also, you start to realize that it's quite logical that things take a bit more time maybe in Colombia, because it's a very big country. And that means that processes can be slower, but most of all, before you find the right strategy, before you find the right partner, that could take a bit of time, but it's worth the effort, because in the end, it's a very big market. So the companies that took the patience, that explored, that also not tried to conquer Colombia in 2 days. No, they took the time. There are many that are successful today. And then you start to realize that after 1 year, they already have more employees, or they already have more business in Colombia than in the rest of the Caribbean region, because of the size of the market. That makes it very attractive. The next one, please. Colombia is also, I think, an important aspect is that the image of Colombia in the world is also changing. So you also have Netflix, or you have seen some of the series that you can also find today. And that's something, for example, that happens a lot in Europe. In the Netherlands, there are still many people that don't have the correct image of Colombia, that still walk around with the stereotypes of the past. But Colombia today, if you look in the world and you look at investors, you look at the interest from other economies in Colombia, you see that Colombia today is a very attractive economy and that the world has noticed. So Colombia also receives a lot of foreign direct investment from the whole world. So after Brazil and after Mexico, it's actually the biggest recipient of foreign direct investment in Latin America. And that also means that, for example, if you look at tourism, of course, tourism is a very wide industry, but Colombia today, of course, not, because we have been closed for several months. But look at 2019 and you will realize that Colombia, for example, in tourism, we had in 2019, we had more than 6 million tourists that visit Colombia. That's a number that's higher than Peru, for example. So if you talk to anybody in the Netherlands at a party or at a family reunion, and you ask them which country does receive more tourists, Peru or Colombia, they will all say Peru, because Peru is Machu Picchu, is very well known, and Colombia has another type of image. But if you look at the numbers, then you see that Colombia has quickly become a very attractive tourism destination for tourists from different parts of the world. If you look at the investment projects, you will also find that quite a big part of those investment projects have been in tourism, but also you'll find other sectors, like I mentioned. If you looked at this one, at this slide, 10 years ago, you would find mining and oil and gas, probably, and maybe some others, agriculture, something. But today you see real estate, you see software. Medellin is quickly becoming, or at least would like to become, the Silicon Valley of Latin America. It is not, I promise you, but they would like to be called the Silicon Valley in Latin America. And there's a lot of IT related investment in Colombia. If you look at Medellin today, you will find a lot of international companies in the IT sector that have established themselves in Medellin. You will find here logistics and transport, agro industry, financial services, construction materials, automotive industry. So today, a much more diversified country than before. Let's continue. Well, the other, if you think back of where I started with the 4 main aspects of the Colombian economy, the 4th one would be trade agreements with with big part of the world. You will find here that Colombia has agreements in place with 60 countries, more than 1.5 billion consumers in the world that are connected to the trade agreements that Colombia today has. And between the agreements, United States, European Union, almost all the countries in Latin America, some of the Asian countries. So Colombia is a very open country with a lot of trade agreements, which means that import duties, import procedures, requirements are quite international here, are quite open. This is not the most complex country to start or to sell your products. Of course, it's always relative. It's who you compare to. If you compare Colombia to Brazil, then Colombia is probably easy. But if you compare it to Panama or to Singapore, then probably not that much. So it's always, of course, to whom you compare. The next one, please. And like I mentioned, the IT industry, but everything related to tech. I think it's quite impressive what has happened in Colombia in the past 5 years. If you look at tech startups that have their bases in Colombia, there's also many. Here you will find some of the examples. Some of the examples of the tech startups that you might know. Rappi is, for example, very, very well known. It's the biggest one, it's the first Colombian unicorn. But if you look at the map on the right side, you will see that Colombia in the region Latin America is very leading in being the basis and the place where a lot of startups come from, have their basis. And I think also for companies in Aruba that work in the IT industry, that work with applications, that work with computing, then I think in this sector, there's also a lot of ways to work together. Maybe not with, here we have some of the very big examples, but it's a very dynamic ecosystem in Colombia. And I have seen that IT-related companies from Aruba, also from Curacao, have become very successful here. If you look at the examples of companies from Aruba and Curacao that today employ more people here or have more business in Colombia than they have at home, then you will find that many are from the IT-related industries. Continue, please. Well, this is, we also did a bit of study. This is what if you look at the exports from Aruba to Colombia at this moment, then you'll find this kind of products. Kitchenware, phones, water, pumps. So actually a lot of products. And of course, not all those products are produced on Aruba. Many of them might come from elsewhere, but are through Aruba also sold here. I think that's something we see, that if you represent a kitchenware brand from Europe or from elsewhere on Aruba, and it's working well on Aruba, and you look at the big Colombian market, why not sell the same products also in Colombia? So that's something we see, that not necessarily everything is produced on Aruba or is made on Aruba, but if you are able to sell it successfully on Aruba, you could also think of selling it here. So that happens for quite a lot of products. In my opinion, not enough yet. There's still relatively low exports from Aruba to Colombia. And I think that's part also because of what we see here. I think many of you that have joined today do not recognize their products in this list. So you will work in the creative industries, or you will work in the tech industries, or you will work in tourism, or you will work in construction sector. You will probably not all find your products here. That's because they are probably not being exported, or not that much that they would enter into this list. But it's not because there's no opportunity. That's much, in my opinion, much more because I think the opportunity has not been explored enough yet. Next one, please. And then before I'm going to give the floor to Alison, just one more slide that I will present, or at least partially. Of course, you will all have the question, what is nice? There could be a lot of opportunities, but are they still there? Is Colombia still buying outside of the country? How has COVID-19 affected? Are there still sectors that offer opportunities, including in this moment? Because of course, we cannot deny that this is a very hard moment worldwide, in Aruba, in Colombia, everywhere. And that means that some sectors that normally are a very big driver of the economy, like tourism or construction, at this moment in Colombia, they have also been paralyzed. And that means that in many sectors, the opportunity at this specific moment in time might not be the same as a year ago. But there are sectors that do have had a very big boost and do have had a very good momentum, although the crisis. And then you see, of course, that tech services, so everything related to cybersecurity, big data, computing. Colombia, I would say that I've been here 7 years, but what has Colombia in this year, in the past 5 months, I think digitalization has been more than in the past 5 years. I think that happens worldwide. That, of course, we all get aware of the fact that we should do more things online, that we should digitalize our business. But maybe the difference is the speed in which Colombia has had to do that, because Colombia is still a very paper-oriented country. But if you look at what has happened in the past 5 years, the digitalization has been very, very impressive. In a time of 5 months, a lot of things have changed, and a lot of things that were not at all digitalized have now taken the first step. So everything, I would say, related to tech, a very big opportunity in Colombia also at this moment. Industry, of course, Colombia has to feed its population because people are still eating, people are still drinking. Maybe there's less tourism, but with a country with 50 million inhabitants, of course, internal supply is very important. But also Colombia is one, if you look at the FAO, they have a list of the future feeders of the world. So they have a list of 10 countries that in the future have to feed the world, because there's not so many countries that actually have the potential to grow their produce. If you look at Colombia, Colombia has 6 million hectares of agricultural ground that are currently being used, but in the country there's 26. So there's 20 million more of hectares that could be used for agricultural produce, which means, of course, that there's a lot of potential for Colombia to become one of the feeders of the world in the future. It already is for many products, but there's a lot of potential to grow in fruits, to grow in vegetables. So also, if you have solutions related to industry, for example, of products you're buying elsewhere, but could also commercialize here, that could be a very important possibility as well. Professional services, I think most of all, in these times, we all have to reinvent ourselves. We have to find new ways of existing. And that means that a lot of companies, and most of all the SMEs in Colombia, they're also looking for advice from other countries, advice from experts that maybe have another view on things, could turn things around. So we also see that if you look at professional services, that in these times, companies need to change, but they don't always have the instruments nor the knowledge to do the change management. So we also see a lot of foreign experts that today are able to help Colombian companies to stay in business. And of course, the orange economy. The current government in Colombia, they said that the new oil of Colombia is the orange economy. So when President Duque started, some 2 years ago when he started, he said, for me, the future of Colombia is agriculture, is tourism, and is the orange economy. The orange economy, he is our president of orange economy. He studied orange economy in his past life. So he said, I want to make the orange economy one of the main pillars of economy. And that's what they have been doing since. Of course, orange economy is a very broad term. It includes a lot of things, but Colombia is really trying to focus on the creative industries, so on arts, jewelry, the textile related sectors, but also of course on movies, on audiovisual. So really what is happening, or it has happened in the past years in Colombia, is making the orange economy every time more important. That's the sectors you don't find here. They will probably be much more affected by COVID-19 because, of course, it affects almost all sectors. But if I had to say 4 in Colombia that I think that still also today offer opportunities in Colombia, I would say it's these 4. Alison, the floor is yours to continue, and I will come back to you at the end, and then we will start the questions, answers, discussion part.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and good morning to everyone. So during the next slides, I'm going to present you in detail some opportunities for different sectors. So let's continue to the next one, please. Thank you. So the first sector that I would like to mention is the professional services sector, which in 2019 grew by 3.7%. This including all different professional services like scientific and administrative professional services. And these graphs that you are seeing here, we want to show you the variations in the trade balance for the services sector in Colombia that are mainly caused by COVID-19. Here you can see the value of exports and imports of services for 2019. And for 2020, we can see a radical change, mainly in the transport services activities, and also for other business services whose value grew exponentially. Let's continue to the next one, please. In this slide, you can see best discriminated the values for each of the subsectors in 2019. In the case of transport services, the passenger air transport services were the ones with the highest participation, with almost 70%, is followed by postal and courier services and also maritime cargo services. In the case for other administrative services, the business consulting activities related with business and administration and public relations also had a greater participation with 22.5%. This followed by call center and travel agency services. This mainly shows that despite being a great exporter of some services, Colombia also has a large market to serve, which does through import of services. Let's continue to the next one. The opportunities that I present you here are the ones that have performed better in the Colombian economy during 2019. But they are also some opportunities that we have identified thanks to our proximity to companies from different sectors here in Colombia. We can see some opportunities for consulting activities clearly related to business, also some art valuation activities, some consulting activities related with security, agronomy, architecture, environment, and circular economy, which, as Jean-Willem mentioned, it's a topic that it's taking more strength every day. There you will also find some concrete opportunities. Next one, please. These opportunities are more related to the tourism services sector and all recreational activities. We identify some opportunities for diving schools, for wedding planners, some park activities, among others. And although at this time the sector is not fully active, surely Colombia is going to return with more strength to be a graded tourist attraction in the world. Next one, please. Of course, it is also important to talk about the orange economy and all its subsectors or activities, because the creative industry is currently generating more employment than the traditional Colombian coffee sector. And that is why we think that we should all continue to appreciate its potential. In 2019, the sector contributed a 3.3% to the national GDP, and the value of artistic and entertainment activities grew by 2.5%. I would also like to share with you that actually Bogota is one of the most attractive cities for investment in the creative industry sector. In 2018, the foreign direct investment was close to $500 million. And this context is also being promoted by the national government throughout different calls that in 2018 reached almost 14 billion pesos. Next slide, please. And that is why we present you some opportunities in which we consider that alliances can be generated with different Colombian companies that carry out artistic activities and live shows, or alliances with individual artists who are musicians, writers, producers, and among others. The link that you are seeing here is from the Ministry of Culture in Colombia, their webpage, and there you will find all open calls for different activities in the sector. So in case you're interested in making some alliances with a Colombian company or an individual, you can definitely check the webpage. Next slide, please. Now for the industrial sector, we want to show you the behavior of different activities. As for example, for the agriculture sector, we find very good behaviors for activities such as agricultural crops, coffee growing, livestock, forestry, and fishing, being fishing the sector with the fastest growth in 2019. For the manufacturing sector, we found positive growth in the food products manufacturing, including the production of beverage and tobacco, the manufacture of textile products, the transformation of wood, and also the manufacture of metallurgical products, among others. And although the construction sector showed a decrease, specifically due to the construction of residential and non-residential buildings, there was a growth in the construction of roads and railways. So that we see a potential opportunity. And for the wholesale and retail sector, the transportation and food storage activities are highlighted or were highlighted in 2019. Next slide, please. To conclude this part of the presentation, I would like to show you again two links where you can find the calls of the Colombian government for the industrial sector, but also for the orange economy sector. And also there you can see the name of different events that take place in normal times, but we hope it can be carried out virtually in 2021. There you will find some events for the agricultural sector, such as Expo Agrofuturo and FENAVI, and other events in the creative industry sector, such as Expo Artesanías, Antigráficas, and among others. And so here I conclude. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are going to continue with the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Alison. I think this was to give you an idea of, I know the group is quite diverse today, but this was to give you an idea of the different types of sectors that might be of interest to you. If we forgot your sector, of course, you can ask a specific question to us, and then we will tell you, try to tell you a bit more about your sector. But of course, if the group is diverse, we have to touch upon some. And we think these are some of the sectors that can be very important and offer potential to you. Like I mentioned before, I think there's a lot of opportunities that have not been explored sufficiently. I think there's still a lot of room for finding new sectors, for finding new ways of working together between Aruba and Colombia. Here are some of the ideas I have before going into detail. I think a very important one, like I mentioned, a very important one is that I think there's also a lot of alliances possible. We see every time more that companies that, for example, from the creative industry, or the example that I mentioned of the wedding planners, but I think with the expertise, with the knowledge, and with the creativity on Aruba, you could very well complement the Colombian sector. So why not work together in the creative sector? Why not think of joint initiatives? Why not find ways of between artists from Aruba and Colombia? Why not find ways to work together? Because I think with the potential of the Colombian market, but also with the government programs that exist in Colombia for stimulating this sector, but also for making it an internationally recognized sector, I think that's where very nice collaborations with groups or with individuals from Aruba could start. So please, I'm going to present you some options which are, of course, for products and services, but also think with outside of the box. I think if we think in alliances, if we think in partnerships, with what you have to offer and combining that with the strengths of Colombian initiatives, I think new things could arise. And that's something we see in practice, that we have had a company that is very good at crowd management services. So if you have a big festival, you have to think very well of how people move at the festival. Well, that's something Colombia, there's a lot of festivals here, there's a lot of cultural events, but that part is still something that can improve very much. So then you can start a collaboration between a company that's very small, but very specialized in managing big crowds and thinking very well of the flows of people, and offer that to partners in Colombia and organize the festivals together. So those kind of ideas, please also think of that. That said, I think there's three, if you look at what we have seen in the past years, there's basically, besides the alliances, besides the partnerships, which would be the fourth, three options, which would mean Aruba Caribbean is the market, Colombia is the market, or even a third option, which would be the Netherlands, Europe is the market. Let me first talk about the first one. Please continue. Well, if Aruba is the market, it's basically buying goods in Colombia. So in the sectors on the island, you have all kinds of products not being produced locally that could be bought in Colombia. So that's something that already happens. Like I mentioned, Aruba is in the top 10 of export destinations for Colombia. And that's because of a reason, because there's a lot of products coming from Colombia fresh produce, but also other types of products. But of course, also there, try to think of new ways. For example, do maybe buy not the final product in Colombia, but buy an intermediate product and do the last part of the process, do it on Aruba. That's something we see is happening every time more. But also think of, if you buy a product in Colombia and it works well in your local market, why not be ambitious and try to become the representative of those Colombian companies also on Curacao or on the other islands, or maybe even a bigger part of the Caribbean. So something we have also seen is that, of course, Aruba can be a hub for companies from Latin America that want to do more in the Caribbean. Of course, there's always the logistics challenge, and that has been improving, but it's still a challenge. But every time more, we think that Colombia is becoming a provider of the Caribbean, and Aruba could position itself very well. So that's the first one. That's the one you probably all know, because if you go to the supermarket, you will find products from Colombia. But try to think of new ways to benefit from that, because Colombia has a lot of companies with beautiful products, but they are not very experienced internationally. They don't speak English well. They don't know the international market that well. You do. And that could be an opportunity also to use something that already exists, but convert it into an additional opportunity. So that's the first one. Let's continue. Well, here is the second one. So that's the one we have been talking about or at least that's the background of the session of today, is to, for you, the people that have joined, almost all of you, their main interest is to see if what you make, what you produce, what you offer in Aruba, if you can also sell it in Colombia. So that's the second one. And then in that case, Colombia is the market. So you're aiming to sell something in Colombia. And my message is, Colombia is a big market. Colombia is a complex market because of its size. But there are opportunities. We have had more than 20 companies from Aruba that have become successful in Colombia in the past years. So it's possible. And here are some of the sectors we think could offer that potential. We talked quite extensively about the first three, but also industrial products. If you buy a product in Europe or even in Asia, but you think that same product could also work in the Colombian industries, why not sell it? Maybe logistics will not go through Aruba, but the product could be sold here. You could be the person selling it. Education, Colombia, of course, if you look at the vocational level, there's still a lot of things Colombia is looking to find the ways, and is looking very actively for knowledge from other countries. If you look at transport and logistics, but yesterday I had a call about the poultry sector. Colombia is looking very actively internationally for providers of vocational training to train their instructors, to train their people. And of course, the same goes for the tourism sector. For example, Colombia is, although already receiving quite some tourists, is still a developing country in tourism. So education for the tourism industry is still something in progress, and their Aruba institutions could really complement what is already here. But also hospitality supplies, for example. If you are a provider of kitchenware for the local hospitality industry, why not see if you can sell the same products here? And that way I can continue. But I think also the one that we have talked about, and I think the part of the presentation that Alison did, the orange economy, I think it's the industry in which working together is very normal. So finding ways to work together in a creative way, in an innovative way, and that's where I see where the creativity, but also the also I think the cultures combine very well. So I think that's where we can look for new alliances in the future. So the second one, Colombia is the market, and then the third one would be, let's continue. this export of services. So for me, if we talk about Colombia as the market, then it's mainly export of services. Some products that could be exported, of course, from or through Aruba also to Colombia, but I think the opportunity for the future is services. And that's something when we looked at the statistics at the beginning of this presentation, you will not find that much services yet. So that's a sector I would say is the one that offers a lot of potential, but vastly unexploited still. Next one, please. And then, of course, the third one, and that's also something that that I think is getting more shape, is that there's a lot of companies from Colombia that want to go to the rest of the Caribbean or want to go even to Europe. They don't speak the languages, they don't know the business culture very well, they are not very experienced internationally. So you could become a middleman for Colombian companies that want to expand to other countries. But of course, the same the other way around. We have also been working on promoting Aruba as a hub in the Netherlands, for example. There's a lot of companies in the Netherlands that are not very active in Latin America yet. So if you go to medium-sized company in the Netherlands that is active in 40 countries, and you ask them, are you also active in Latin America? I think 80% will say they are not. And that's because Latin America is mainly because they have a focus on Asia, which of course is the emerging market #1 for them. But many have not forgotten about Latin America, but it's the continent that they sometimes don't understand. They don't speak the languages. It's far away. It's a big travel normally. So for many Dutch companies, but the same goes for companies from other European countries, Latin America is still rather unexplored. And that means there's still a lot of opportunity, still a lot of companies from Europe that could be very well active here, but have not done so yet. So I think also something we have been promoting also together with Maria, with Sharon, is also to make companies in the Netherlands aware of the fact that you could also use companies on Aruba being the bridge to Latin America. So that's the third one, which I think is also important. I think you are a perfect hub and you could benefit from the fact that you understand the Colombian businessman much better than I did 7 years ago. I've learned to understand them a bit better, but for you that's natural because you are very used to different cultures. You speak the languages. You probably all speak Spanish almost, and I think that's a big advantage, and also to think that way. And then last but not least, I think going back to the current momentum before we continue with questions and answers, I would like to send you 2 final messages. Of course, these are difficult times everywhere in Aruba here, but I still believe there are opportunities. I still believe that in Colombia we say you have to how do you say it? You have to plant or you have to put the seeds before it will grow, and I think that's not the correct English translation, but I think it's also very important to use this time well, to now establish contacts, to now open doors, to benefit from that in the future, because it's a good time for sowing. That's something I think also very important to take into account. And 2 last things I would like to mention, and that's one, like I told you, digitalization is getting much more shape here, which means that 8 months ago, when Alison or myself gave a call to a Colombian company and we asked them for a video meeting, they would probably say, let me know when you're here, then we drink a cup of coffee. Because also that part was not that digitalized. So there was not that much openness to do meetings online. Today, everything is being done online. There are still very few people in the offices here. So everybody moved to the reality of doing meetings from home, which is actually, if you're a company based on Aruba or in the Netherlands, and you don't want to travel, not only because of the circumstances, but because traveling is a huge investment, then normally it would be very hard for you to explore opportunities here, because if you don't travel, there's no opportunity, there's no meetings, there's no potential start of a business in Colombia. But today, without traveling, you can do many things. And that seems very logical, but if you look at Colombian business culture, that's been a very, very important shift in these months, that you don't need to travel to be able to start business here. Of course, you want to look at each other in the eyes. And of course, looking at someone's eyes through Zoom is not the same as in a meeting room. But the change has been there. And I think for the big group of companies on Aruba, but also elsewhere, everywhere, that doesn't have a lot of, doesn't have the big budgets to be traveling all the time and to make the cost before at some moment get the return. It's very important that today, a lot of things you can do meetings digitally. So we can set up meetings for you with potential clients or with potential partners without the need for you to travel. That's one. And the second one, and that's also something I've talked about with Maria Dijkhoff and with Sharon Erasmus, there's also some support mechanisms which I think could be very helpful. This year, RVO introduced some new vouchers, and these vouchers are of course also applicable for Aruba. And the one that I really like is the one that you find below. It's called SIB. SIB is Starters International Business Market Entry Voucher. So it's a voucher for Aruba companies, or also from the Netherlands or Curaçao, but it's open for Aruba that want to take the step to a new market. So you want to enter a new market. That market can be Colombia, but it could also be Dominican Republic, or it could also be Trinidad and Tobago, or it could also be the United States. But it can, of course, be Colombia. Let's say you want to enter the Colombian market with your company or with your services. You could use this voucher to pay a big part of the process, to pay 50% of the cost related with that process, which I think is a great incentive and a great support. So something we have talked about is also in the current time of challenges, it's very helpful that these vouchers exist. And we have seen in the past months, we have seen many companies from the Caribbean parts that actually have obtained these vouchers. So it's not difficult, it's not complex, it's not a large process, it's not that you have to fill out 500 forms. No, it's very easy, accessible, and of course, for the Netherlands, maybe the companies that start international business do it in Belgium, but when you're based on Aruba, you will probably do it in Colombia or one of the other countries that are nearby. So please use these options. Take a look. If you look on Google on SIB Market Entry Voucher, or in Dutch Markt Entree, you will find it. And I think it can be very useful for many. I think we're going to the next one. I think that's what I wanted to tell you. I took more time than I said, but that usually happens. I'm sorry for that. A lot of things I like to tell you to also make you aware of the opportunities and to stimulate that you might get more interested in doing things in Colombia. I will take a look at the chat, but maybe there's someone that would like to ask their question live, because that's why we activated cameras and microphones. So let's make this last part as dynamic as possible.
Hey, well, Willem van Bokhoven, thank you for your great presentation. It was very insightful and informative. Our company is specialized in big data for healthcare. Can we talk in detail about this after the presentation? Can we exchange contact information?
Yes, of course. I think that's not my because every sector is different, and of course every sector also it could be good to do a complete meeting about talking about the opportunities for you. But of course, you will find I will also put my details in the chat so that you all have my email address. We can plan a call to further discuss. But of course, health sector is a very big sector in Colombia these days. We have a very important. We have 2 health weeks at this moment with a lot of activities going on at this moment. So you might be able to join one of them next week. Next week we will have a big conference with all kinds of Colombian actors on telemedicine, for example. Yeah, please, I think a very interesting sector in which we are very active. So I will put my details in the chat, and let's plan another call. Who would be willing to ask a question?
Yeah, no question really, but yeah, it's a lot of overwhelming information. So that's it's nice to know that that possibility is there. So now it's all about doing our homework and see.
Perfect, thank you. I think I was looking also. Well, thank you very much for your comments. Of course, we will share the presentation. The presentation is, of course, together with Sharon. We will send the slides to everybody for you to revise also at another moment. And of course, very open to further deepen in the case of your business. But I was taking a look at the chat. Well, there's several questions, I think, about several subjects, but the first one is about opening bank accounts. Well, Colombia is, of course, Colombia has a very strong financial sector, which is mainly dominated by local banks. So the presence of international banks in Colombia is there, but if you look at retail banking, then you will find mainly Colombian bank groups. So we have Grupo Aval, which would be Grupo de Bogotá, and some others. We have Bancolombia, we have Davivienda, which are the 3 biggest banking groups of the country. It's not that hard to open a bank account in Colombia, but of course you can do that as an individual, you can do that as a company. If you do it as a company, of course, it's very important to establish your company also in Colombia, because normally you first incorporate a company here and then you open the bank account for the company in Colombia. So the hardest thing is normally if you're not really based in Colombia, to open bank accounts is quite hard. There's a lot of rules. Colombia is in that way quite bureaucratic. But opening bank accounts is very well possible, but the easiest way is if you have actually a real foothold in the country. Maritime transport is another question that's in the chat. Well, maritime transport has been a challenge. If you look at the products that you will find, or the Colombian companies that would really like to export to Aruba, but also the importers from Aruba looking for new products in Colombia, transport, logistics, and finding cost-effective ways is always a challenge. It has been changing, so today it's probably it's already better than a few years ago. So there's more options. Of course, COVID-19 is a moment in which that statement is probably not true. But normally in 2019 there were already more options, but there's still a lot to do in that sense. So we have several members at the Holland House that are, or at least one called Intilistica, that's very active on promoting that there's more and better logistics between Colombia and Aruba. So it's something that, of course, if you want more trade, of course, that maybe it's a bit the chicken and the egg. If you have more trades, then probably logistics will become easier. But in this sense, there's already improvement, and there are companies working from Aruba and Colombia on improving logistics. Let's see.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. I have a fast question.
Of course.
Has been there any changes in the import taxes situation, well, from Aruba to Colombia? As you know, if you export from Holland to Colombia, you have some tax benefits. We are considered the lower what you call it, countries, or the lower Países Bajos. So we don't have that opportunity. Is there any changes in the policy of Colombia having any tax benefits from Aruba or Curacao or these islands?
Thank you. I think it's a very good question. Maybe Sharon, is that a question you could answer? Is there currently developments in talks between Aruba and Colombia on trade arrangements going on?
Currently, we do not have like a direct arrangements regarding tax with Colombia. However, there are many ways in which we can assist and give information on various other areas. There are opportunities that can be, again, but it depends on the company, on the sector, on what the form of the company. So there are a lot of possibilities, but currently, no, we do not have like a special treaty or in that sense.
I believe this is really important. If you are planning, if you are pushing the local producers, that we are a few, we can count ourselves in one hand or maybe two. It's really difficult for us to try to get on top that we have our products cost more to be made, and to be able to get into Colombia and pay the taxes they are asking everybody. Actually, I have to say that we have been doing some business because we do have a company there also, Bon Caribe Trading. And we have to go like Panama, Colombia, to be able to don't pay the taxes that they are charging us as an import tax.
What percentage do you pay currently in average for your products if you would send them directly to Colombia?
Mostly it's going to be about 18%.
Yeah, it's of course, if you see that Colombia has a lot of trade agreements with other countries, it's a factor that doesn't help because it makes the products even more expensive. Well, I think, yeah, I think I perfectly understand your concern. I think that's also something that is important to take into account, because for services, for example, it might be a bit easier, but if you talk about products, then of course you have the import duties that Colombia has for countries with a free trade agreement and the countries that don't have, and there's quite a difference. Although Colombia is not an import duty, well, if you compare it maybe to Brazil, then import duties are in general a bit lower, but of course this is very big constraint for you. So let's see what else we can think of. Maybe you can also plan a separate call, because I would really like to study the structure of the company you have here to see what could be done or if we find any other ways than through Panama.
It's very strange, and I would also like to know more about it because actually we don't have any trade agreement with Panama as well. So it's when you send your product to Panama, you should be paying also import duties. So that means that the import duties in Colombia are higher than the ones in Panama, because we don't have trade agreements with any South American countries.
There is ways, and we are using whatever we can find. So that we can talk later, Maria. But there is ways, but it's difficult. If you check the pork producers you have in Aruba, we have that situation. On top that we don't have really a connection unless it's for a full container from Aruba to nowhere. So it's part of it. I joined because I thought on the presentation, which is very good, thank you. We had some ways to try to do business over there, but in reality, in the meantime, we don't form part of the treaties that they have with a lot of countries, including the Netherlands, directly. we will have this situation if we are going to try to produce something here, no matter what, and bring it into Colombia. So thank you again. My question is answered. There is no changes. So for products produced in Aruba, we will continue to have this situation. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. I think looking at some of the other questions in the chat, we probably are not able to answer all, but I think there are several. We as Holland House, we are there to support. So if you aim to open a bank account here, you can count on us to help you with the contacts with the banks, or to give a little push in the process so that banks do the right approvals in time. So that's one. And I also saw some questions of, do you have a list of Colombian companies interested in Aruba? What we have is, we have a list of Colombian companies that contact us because of their interest in the Caribbean. So that is from all kinds of sectors, companies that contact our team because they have an interest of expanding to the Caribbean. But of course, we have a very large network as well. So some of the companies, they very proactively come to us, but we also have a very big network. So if you would say, I'm looking for suppliers of activewear from Colombia that could be producing private label that I could sell in the Caribbean, then of course we can recommend you also some of the parties we have seen in the market, which we think are the best fit for what you are looking for. So it's one, we always have a lot of lists, but those are normally the Colombian companies that very proactively come to us. But also, if you're looking for the best candidate, we can also help you find it, because that's normally the best way. Not only take into account the companies that themselves have shown the interest, but also if you would be looking for a very specific company in Colombia, client or supplier, we are there to help you find them. So send us the info, send us what you would be looking for in a client or in a supplier, and then we can take a look who we think would be the best candidates in Colombia, because that's something with the network that we have that we can perfectly help you with. So that's, I think, several of the questions answered in this one. I think also about the propiedad intelectual, intellectual property, IP. In the case of the creative industry, also because Colombia is promoting this industry, trying to protect the industry, not only nationally, but also the corporations internationally. I think it's quite well regulated, but we could send you more information, which will probably be quite extensive documents. But in general, intellectual property in Colombia is very well protected. But we can send you the details specifically for your industry. I don't know if there's anybody else that would like to comment with us live. That would be great.
And thank you for the meeting. From the logistics side, what you guys think about the connectivity between Colombia and Aruba? Because that's just one of the major problems that we always see. I mean, you always get business people from Colombia in general and Aruba, they want to do business together. And depending on the commodity or the product, it always can be shipped through containers to Colombia between two ports. But it's always some product have to be fly out from Colombia to Aruba. And our problem on this side of the islands, Aruba and Curacao, is always the freight, because they always have to charge the freight double to get to the final destination, because those islands have nothing to export back to Colombia. And the air freight plane go empty back to the Colombia. And the company that lease or charge the aircraft have to charge one time the full freight to the customer. And that is one of the major, we can say the problem to the customer on this side of the island. What type of exemption of incentive you think both islands and Colombia can work out together. If any company take the risk to do the charter flight, what do you think Holland House can do for that company, of any company that will able and willing to do that?
I think, thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't hear your name, but I think it's a great question, and thank you very much for asking. I think logistics, like I mentioned, logistics is still an important challenge. Of course, I think this presentation has had several objectives. The first one that we, of course, had with Sharon was to share you that we think there are also opportunities for exporting services from Aruba to Colombia. So the knowledge, the expertise, the consultancy, the products, the services related to IT that have been developed on the island, and that they could also be sold in Colombia. That's, I would say, the first objective I had today. And of course, for that sector, if you talk about export of services, or you talk about export of the creative mind, then of course, logistics is normally in a virtual way. So for that group, probably logistics will not be that big of a constraint, because what they are looking to sell in Colombia is their creativity, their knowledge, their services, their software. So their logistics is less important. And that's why we think that should be part of the priorities for the future, to stimulate more companies on Aruba to also think that way if you talk about Colombia. But then there's, of course, many other sectors that you mentioned that would like to maybe that's the physical goods between the countries that would come from Aruba to here, or from Colombia to Aruba. And then, of course, logistics is still a big challenge. There's relatively few options, maritime, also air freight. The options that do exist are quite expensive. Frequency is quite low. So that's a challenge. I think normally, of course, when volumes get bigger, also the options become more. But what we can do, and it's not that's not an easy process, but we have been able to do in some sectors at least. If I think it's both sides. You cannot say it's one of the sides is to blame. I think when you talk about logistics, you always have point A and point B. So you cannot blame one of the sides, but you can try to work together. So what I think in many sectors, what we have been able to do in some, not in all, but for example, in perishables, there has been some kind of improvement. What we should do is have very clear what is the need on the island, or what is the need from Aruba, also maybe looking at the islands that could also be serviced from Aruba. So what is the need? So what do we exactly need? And then what we can do is to find in Colombia the right suppliers to combine their offer, because sometimes it's also a problem of there's one Colombian company that wants to sell in Aruba, but they don't sell enough to fill complete containers. So our role many times is also to combine and to find, to consolidate the offer from Colombia, so that actually logistics options become more viable. But that's a business case you have to build together. For that, you have to have very clear the business case from Aruba, and then we have to put that in practice in Colombia. And that's something we have been able to do for some sectors, but for many, that's still something that has to be done. So if, for example, from your side, you have a clear idea, this is what we need from Colombia, then we on our side can help to find the right Colombian providers, the right companies, but also for them to join hands so that logistics becomes actually a bit more feasible. So that's, I think, not a question or not an answer to your question, but at least some of the things we are working on. So we are working on bringing together the Colombian side so that actually volumes become bigger, that consolidation becomes easier, becomes more feasible. That's something we are working on quite actively.
Thank you, Jan.
I think there's already people leaving us, and I think together with Sharon and Maria,
and I'd love to ask a question.
Perfect. Let's do the last question, and then of course all the other questions we will answer them by email.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody in the group. My question will be: has there any approach been made from Minister Xiomara Maduro and Ministro de Hacienda Alberto Carrasquilla in Colombia? I believe that's actually where the key connection needs to start, in which these two, at a government level, they can come up with agreements in which exemptions can be made for Aruba, because Colombia does apply these things, and they're doing it with other countries. They're doing it actively for the past few years, but this happens at a government level. I'm not sure of what influence you guys have at a government level, but I am mostly sure that Minister Maduro, which is the local Minister of Finances, does have the actual hierarchy as a minister and part of the government to represent the Aruban people with the Minister of Hacienda in Colombia to reach these kinds of agreements. Like Mr. Helder was mentioning about the logistics. There's so many expenses tied to every single transaction that it becomes very difficult to actually be profitable, which is what at the end of the day every business is looking for, profit. But based on the amount of processes and expenses tied to every small transaction for every product, then we actually are at a place where we need this kind of government agreements so that tax exemptions can be made and we can do business. I do agree, and I do actually witness anything and everything you've said in your presentation. There are great opportunities. I was in Colombia in year 2013 doing some business, and it was amazing. The opportunities were great. In a week, I was able to explore and see so many opportunities and so many ways to make profit. But we do face the fact that taxes are an issue. Logistics are expensive as they are, but that's period, from anywhere and everywhere, from anywhere and to everywhere. So that's a reality we cannot change. But the reality that can be changed is that the ministers at a governmental level can reach agreements to benefit actually both parties, both countries. Has anything been done in that regard, or could you ignite that kind of connection?
Yes, approximately 2 years ago, the minister visited Colombia, and she had meetings with several ministers and heads of divisions in Colombia, also with ProColombia. The issue, you have to see it, it's on a more macroeconomic level. When you prepare a trade agreement, it has to be a win-win for both parts. And actually, because Aruba is an importing country and we import almost 90% of our products that we consume on the island, it's very difficult to have trade agreements with other countries in which you, for example, eliminate or lower import duties. Once you lower those import duties, that means that you will receive more financial funds for the government. And it's always a win for the third party country and less for us, because we do not have enough products to export that can make a balance in that equation. So that was one of the reasons why Aruba has up to today no trade agreements with countries in Latin America, because we import from them a lot. So that means that if we give them an exemption on the taxes, it will mean that we will receive more income at the government level for import duties. While because we export so little to those countries, it will actually have no impact on their revenues. So that's one of the reasons the minister had conversations, and what we have is some collaboration agreements with Colombia. How to collaborate more closely. If they need information, they reach out to us and we supply the information. The same as we want specific information, we can reach out to different institutions in Colombia. And I'm very happy that we have Holland House also now, that we can actually, they can give us, and you, especially you, this assistance. But that is the main situation why we don't have agreements, and it's not because they have not tried. It's more on a macroeconomic level. It's not a win-win.
Clear, understood. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, and thank you very much for such a great explication what you just mentioned. But I do believe that because Aruba is opening doors for Colombia to actually export so much product to Aruba, should not be a benefit for Aruba as well, since should be a win-win like you mentioned. We open our doors to them, so I believe they should open the doors for us as well.
Yes, of course, but the amounts of the export possibilities at this moment doesn't give us the enough impact as to be able to eliminate the import duties for products from Colombia. That doesn't mean that if we see that a specific project is, let's say, growing very fast, that new conversations can be opened with Colombia. They are always open for conversations, as well as the government of Aruba is always open for those kind of conversations.
And I think to answer your question, of course, when you talk about open your doors for business, so I think the Colombian doors for Aruban companies that want to do business here, the doors are quite open. They are very open, I think, actually. And of course, there's all kind of, if you look at the barriers that always exist within any kind of transaction between companies from different countries, you will find the cultural barrier, you will find the technical barrier, you will find the economic barrier. So you have several barriers. And I think, of course, maybe in the technical barrier, well, there might be some duties or some requirements that are still a bit more for Aruba than for the case of the Netherlands, for example, because there is a trade agreement in that case. But on the other side, the other barriers, I think Aruba is very well positioned. If you look at the cultural barrier or you look at the economic barrier, there are barriers that for you are the threshold is much lower than for other countries that might have some kind of tax benefit, but they don't have the other benefits to take away the other barriers. So of course, pricing is always important, but always try to think also of the other advantages you do have, because other countries find a lot of barriers to do trade with Colombia that you will not find. And I think that's also a bit part of the message. There are things we cannot change because Colombia is a big exporter. Aruba is not yet to Colombia, but there are other barriers which I think make you very well positioned. So I think there will probably be more questions, but I think we should finalize because the group is getting
the tax and logistic work and everything. So
thank you very much for joining us also today. Thank you all for joining today. I will put, we will share the presentation with our details. Please, for any other types of questions or follow up to this meeting, please contact us, please contact Alison, please contact me. We are there to help together with Maria, together with Sharon. I don't know if from your side, Sharon or Maria, you have any final words before we close?
I don't know. Maria, or on behalf of the Department of Economic Affairs and our director, Maria, we are really grateful. We would like to thank you, Jan and Alison, for this really informative presentation this morning. I think our companies, our entrepreneurs got a lot of information, and indeed there are some things that can be improved on, but there are besides treaties, there are a lot of opportunities for our entrepreneurs regarding doing business in Colombia. And yes, from me, they will, if it's okay with you, Jan, I will share your contact information with the group that participated today, and also the materials of the presentation. And to all our Aruban businesses, thank you so much for participating this morning.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody, and have a good weekend as well.
Bye. Thank you.
Buen fin de semana.